Women are facing poverty. The most shocking truth hitting society right now is that millions of women are staring down extreme financial hardship, drowning in debt, and desperately turning to dating apps and matchmaking, hoping to find a man who will step in and cover their burdens. But men have woken up, seen the patterns clearly, and decided they are not signing up to be financial rescuers anymore. What you are about to hear is the full story of how decades of shifting dynamics pushed men to walk away completely, leaving women to face reality on their own terms for the first time in generations. And by the end of this, you will understand exactly why men are choosing solitude, peace, and self focus over entanglement, and why that choice is permanent. Stay with me through every detail because the conclusion reveals not just what happened, but why the old ways of provision and rescue are gone forever and will not return. Over the past several decades, profound changes have reshaped how men and women interact, particularly in Western and Westernized societies where traditional roles once provided a clear structure for relationships and family life. Women increasingly embraced independence through education, careers, and financial autonomy, often supported by policies and cultural shifts that emphasized self reliance and equality. At the same time, feminism highlighted inequalities and encouraged women to demand more from society and from men, framing many traditional expectations as outdated or oppressive. This led to widespread messaging that men were no longer essential providers, that masculinity carried toxic elements needing correction, and that women could thrive without depending on male support. Terms emerged to critique everyday male behaviors. Public spaces saw increased scrutiny of men's actions through recordings and social media callouts, and legal systems evolved in ways that sometimes left men feeling extracted from rather than partnered with. Courts handling divorce, family matters, and civil disputes became arenas where wealth transfer occurred on a large scale, often leaving men financially diminished long after separation. These experiences accumulated over time, building a sense of caution and eventually detachment among men who observed or lived through them. Men began to recognize patterns in interactions that felt one sided. Dates frequently involved expectations of payment without reciprocal investment, conversations centered on demands rather than mutual interest, and social platforms amplified stories where men faced public shaming for minor perceived infractions. Groups formed online to share details about past dates, sometimes with the intent of warning others, but often resulting in reputational damage that extended far beyond the individuals involved. Paternity issues surfaced in high profile cases, reinforcing distrust. Women positioned themselves as holding inherent value simply by existing, declaring their presence sufficient contribution to any relationship. Men internalized these messages over years, hearing repeatedly that they were optional, replaceable, or burdensome. The cumulative effect was a quiet reevaluation. Many men discovered that solitude brought calm rather than loneliness. They learned to value their own company, pursue interests without compromise, and build lives centered on personal satisfaction rather than external approval. This shift coincided with economic realities pressing harder on everyone. Inflation rose steadily, wages stagnated for many, and costs for housing, childcare, education, and daily living climbed relentlessly. Women who once relied on state support systems or dual income households found those safety nets strained or insufficient in the face of mounting personal debt from credit, lifestyle expenses, or unexpected setbacks. Social media showcased images of luxury and ease, fueling spending that outpaced earnings for a significant number. When financial pressure mounted, many turned toward dating as a potential solution, seeking partners who could provide stability or direct assistance. Conversations on apps revealed clear intentions in some cases, with women openly stating preferences for men capable of covering expenses or debts. Yet men, having observed these dynamics repeatedly, grew increasingly selective. Background checks, credit inquiries, and straightforward questions about finances became more common as safeguards. The realization spread that entering a relationship under such conditions often meant assuming burdens without guaranteed reciprocity or emotional fulfillment. In regions influenced by similar cultural trends, including parts of Asia where traditional expectations persist alongside modern economic pressures, parallel patterns emerged. Matchmaking markets showed women entering with significant debt loads, hoping to transfer responsibility to a partner. Some openly waived customary payments or accepted broader criteria in exchange for financial relief. Men responded by stepping back, recognizing marriage as a high risk proposition with low returns when weighed against personal freedom. Stories circulated of hidden financial maneuvers within relationships, where savings accumulated through hard work vanished into family obligations or undisclosed transfers, eroding trust completely. These accounts reinforced the view that entanglement carried disproportionate downside. Men who prioritized their own lives reported higher satisfaction, describing routines built around rest, hobbies, travel, and minimalism. They removed unnecessary complexities, focusing resources on what genuinely enhanced their well being. Society began noticing the change through visible signs. Fewer men initiated approaches in public or online. Dating participation declined among certain demographics. Marriage rates dropped sharply in multiple countries, hitting historic lows as young people delayed or opted out entirely. Birth rates followed suit, prompting concern from policymakers and commentators. Women expressed frustration in public forums, sharing experiences of unmatched expectations, prolonged singledom, or financial strain without traditional support. Videos and posts captured pleas for men to return to providing roles, highlighting difficulties in affording basics or maintaining lifestyles once taken for granted. These expressions often met indifference from men who had already committed to self preservation. The dynamic flipped in ways few anticipated. Where men once shielded women from harsh economic truths, that protection dissolved as men protected themselves first. Men's minimalist nature played a key role in this transition. By disposition, many prefer simplicity, eliminating what does not serve purpose or joy. Relationships once viewed as essential now appeared optional when weighed against peace and autonomy. Overseas options gained appeal in places where cultural norms retained elements of respect, femininity, and lower material demands. Men traveled or built connections abroad, finding compatibility absent in local contexts. This further reduced availability in domestic markets, intensifying pressure on women remaining. The narrative of men as perpetual providers faded, replaced by one of mutual contribution or individual accountability. Women who had championed independence faced the full implications when state resources thinned and personal networks proved limited. Throughout this evolution, men honed pattern recognition skills sharpened by repeated exposure. They trusted observable actions over promises or societal narratives. When words clashed with behavior, reality won. This discernment extended to broader life choices. Careers, health, friendships, and leisure took precedence. Simple luxuries replaced extravagant displays. Rest became valued over constant striving. Happiness derived from internal sources rather than external validation. The result was a growing cohort of men thriving in detachment, unburdened by obligations once deemed inevitable. Women confronting these changes encountered a stark adjustment. Survival became more immediate without assumed backup. Homelessness risks rose in some demographics as debts compounded. Online content reflected desperation mixed with anger. blaming men for withdrawal rather than examining contributing factors. Yet men remained unmoved, having found contentment in withdrawal. They no longer viewed rescue as duty. Society's fabric strained under these tensions, with relationships reframed as partnerships of equals or nothing at all. The intensity of the shift stems from accumulated grievances addressed not through confrontation, but through absence. Men did not declare war, they simply stopped participating in a system that felt rigged. Peace arrived in solitude, proving more fulfilling than conflicted entanglement. Women, long accustomed to options, discovered scarcity where abundance once existed. The era of easy provision ended definitively. Men focused inward, building lives of comfort through discipline and clarity. This redirection of energy produced stability on personal terms, free from external demands. As economic pressures persist globally, the divide widens. Women navigate independence fully realized, bearing costs once shared or deferred. Men sustain progress through self directed paths, unencumbered by roles no longer desired. The conclusion stands clear. Men walked away after years of signals they were unneeded, and in that departure, both sides face unfiltered reality. Women must now sustain themselves without fallback provision, while men preserve resources for their own futures. The old contract dissolved, replaced by individual accountability. No bailout awaits. No return to former dynamics materializes. Men thrive in chosen solitude, resting in the knowledge that their peace remains undisturbed. This brings us to the deeper implications for society at large. When half the population opts out of traditional pairing, cascading effects follow. Economies adjust to lower marriage driven consumption. Housing markets reflect delayed family formation. Cultural narratives evolve to address prolonged singledom. Mental health conversations expand to include isolation versus chosen independence. Yet for men who embrace this path, the trade off proves worthwhile. Daily life simplifies, stress diminishes, personal growth accelerates without compromise. Joy emerges from mastery of one's domain rather than navigation of relational complexities. Women adapting to this landscape discover strengths previously untapped. Careers intensify. Skills sharpen. Networks rebuild on mutual support rather than extraction. Resilience builds through necessity. Some recalibrate expectations, seeking genuine connection over provision. Others double down on independence, finding fulfillment in self sufficiency. The process proves challenging but transformative. No longer shielded, reality teaches lessons in accountability and resource management. Men continue refining their approach. Minimalism extends beyond possessions to relationships and commitments. Focus narrows to high value pursuits. Health improves through consistent habits. Wealth accumulates through disciplined saving rather than spending on others. Travel broadens perspectives. Hobbies deepen satisfaction. The result is a generation redefining success on internal metrics rather than societal benchmarks. The contrast sharpens with each passing year. While some lament lost traditions, others celebrate reclaimed agency. Men who once felt pressured now breathe freely. Women who once assumed support now forge paths independently. Balance emerges not through restoration of old ways, but through acceptance of new realities. Provision shifts from obligation to choice, offered only when mutually beneficial. This narrative unfolds steadily, with each element building on the last. Economic hardship accelerates behavioral changes. Cultural messages reinforce detachment. Legal and social experiences solidify caution. Personal discoveries affirm solitude's value. The cycle reinforces itself, making reversal increasingly unlikely. Men hold firm to their decision, content in the outcome. Women confront the consequences, adapting as required. The transformation did not happen overnight, but built steadily through countless small interactions and large systemic signals that men absorbed and processed over time. Every headline about another high profile case where a man lost everything in family court contributed to the growing awareness. Every viral video of a woman publicly shaming a stranger for an innocent comment or glance added another layer of caution. Every discussion among friends about being used for free meals or entertainment without any genuine interest being returned reinforced the emerging consensus that the risks far outweighed any potential rewards. Men started comparing notes quietly at first and then more openly in online spaces where they could speak without immediate backlash. They shared statistics on suicide rates among divorced men, on child custody outcomes that overwhelmingly favored mothers, even when fathers fought hard to stay involved, on alimony payments that continued long after the relationship ended, and on how often financial ruin followed what was supposed to be a lifelong partnership. These numbers were not abstract. They represented real people men knew personally or saw in their extended circles. The data painted a picture of asymmetry that became impossible to ignore. As this awareness spread, men began making different choices in their daily lives. They stopped approaching women in public spaces altogether, in many cases, because the potential for misinterpretation or escalation felt too high. Gyms that once served as natural meeting grounds turned into places where men kept headphones on, eyes forward, and interactions minimal to avoid any accusation of staring or intruding. Workplaces saw similar shifts, with men limiting casual conversations to strictly professional topics to protect their careers from even the hint of impropriety. Dating apps, which had promised efficiency and abundance, instead became arenas of exhaustion where men faced endless swiping, ghosting after investment, and profiles that openly listed high financial expectations alongside vague descriptions of desired personality traits. The effort required to stand out grew disproportionate to the likelihood of a meaningful connection. Many men simply deleted the apps after one too many experiences where money seemed to be the unspoken primary criterion for interest. This withdrawal extended beyond romance into broader social participation. Men reduced time spent in mixed gender social settings that felt performative or draining. They gravitated toward male only hobbies, fitness groups, gaming communities, and professional networks where conversations stayed direct and free of subtext. They invested in skills that benefited themselves directly, such as mechanical work, investing, coding side projects, or physical training that built confidence and capability without needing external approval. The lifestyle became one of deliberate simplification. Possessions were evaluated ruthlessly, with anything that did not add real value sold or discarded. Living spaces shrank to what was comfortable and affordable rather than impressive. Cars were chosen for reliability and fuel efficiency instead of status. Wardrobes focused on durability and versatility over trends. Food preparation turned efficient and nutritious rather than extravagant. Sleep improved because stress levels dropped. Mental clarity sharpened when constant emotional labor disappeared from daily routines. Women observing these changes from the outside often interpreted the shift as bitterness or immaturity rather than a rational response to accumulated experience. Posts appeared claiming men had become lazy, entitled, afraid of commitment, or simply unable to handle strong, independent women. Yet the men who had made the choice reported the opposite. They felt more capable, more rested, more in control of their futures. Happiness surveys conducted in various countries began showing interesting divergences. Single men in their 30s and 40s frequently scored higher on life satisfaction metrics than their married or cohabiting counterparts, while single women in the same age groups often reported the reverse, with higher stress and lower contentment. These patterns aligned with what men described anecdotally. Freedom from financial provider pressure allowed focus on personal development. Absence of relational conflict reduced cortisol levels. Control over time and money created a sense of agency that many had not experienced before. Economic data added another dimension to the story. Household formation slowed dramatically in developed nations. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Young adults stayed with parents longer or lived in shared housing well into their 30s because dual income stability became harder to achieve. Marriage age rose steadily while the percentage of adults who ever married declined. Fertility rates fell below replacement levels in country after country, prompting government incentives that ranged from cash bonuses to extended parental leave, yet participation remained low. Men cited the same reasons repeatedly when asked about their reluctance: high divorce risk, financial exposure, loss of autonomy, perceived lack of respect or appreciation. Women who wanted families faced a shrinking pool of willing partners who viewed marriage not as partnership, but as a contract stacked against them. The traditional bargain, where a man provided resources in exchange for loyalty and domestic stability, had eroded from both sides. Women gained career opportunities and legal protections, while men gained awareness of downside risks. Neither side fully replaced what was lost. In response to these pressures, some women turned toward international dating or relocation themselves, seeking cultures where traditional gender roles retained more strength. Destinations in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and parts of Latin America saw increased interest from Western women hoping to find men willing to embrace provider roles. Success stories existed, but so did cautionary tales of mismatched expectations and cultural friction. Meanwhile, Western men who pursued similar paths abroad often reported higher satisfaction, citing attitudes of gratitude, femininity, and lower entitlement as key differences. These experiences fueled further domestic detachment because the contrast highlighted what many felt had been lost locally. The globalized dating market revealed that preferences varied widely by region and culture. What Western women increasingly demanded in terms of lifestyle and financial security often clashed with what men were willing to supply after years of feeling undervalued. Back home, the conversation grew louder on social platforms. Women posted videos expressing shock at how difficult dating had become, describing men as checked out, unapproachable, or unwilling to invest. Men responded with their own content, laying out the timeline of grievances from no fault divorce laws to false accusations to financial exploitation to cultural demonization of masculinity. Both sides talked past each other in many cases, with women emphasizing current hardships and men pointing to historical causes. Yet, the practical outcome remained unchanged. Men continued prioritizing their own lives. Attention that once flowed freely toward women now redirected toward self improvement projects, businesses, travel, and leisure. Money that previously funded dates, gifts, and household expenses stayed in bank accounts or went toward assets that appreciated over time. Time once spent navigating relational dynamics now went toward rest, reading, exercise, and meaningful friendships. This redirection produced visible results for many men. Body compositions improved through consistent training. Financial net worth climbed through disciplined saving and investing. Skills expanded in areas ranging from languages to trades to creative pursuits. Mental health stabilized as chronic anxiety from people pleasing behaviors faded. Social circles tightened to those who added value rather than drained it. Life became quieter, but richer in ways that mattered personally. The minimalist philosophy extended naturally to relationships. If a connection did not enhance peace and purpose, it was not pursued. Casual encounters lost appeal when weighed against solitude. Even friendships became more selective, focusing on loyalty and reciprocity rather than obligation. Women facing these realities encountered a steeper learning curve in some areas. Budgeting became non negotiable when no partner offset expenses. Career advancement took on greater urgency as sole provider status settled in for many. Side hustles multiplied to cover gaps left by stagnant wages and rising costs. Friendships with other women deepened as mutual support replaced romantic reliance. Some rediscovered hobbies abandoned during relationship focused years. Resilience grew through necessity, though the transition often carried frustration and grief for what felt like a broken social contract. Online spaces filled with discussions about hypergamy backfiring, about the wall of aging hitting harder without a committed partner, about the loneliness that accompanied financial independence when emotional needs went unmet. These conversations revealed a painful truth. Independence carried costs that had been downplayed or externalized for generations. Men watching from their chosen distance expressed little sympathy in public forums. Having internalized the message that they were optional, they now treated themselves as optional in women's lives as well. The reciprocity they once offered freely no longer extended when it felt unearned. Provision became conditional on mutual respect and contribution rather than automatic. In cases where genuine partnership appeared possible, men remained open, but the bar sat significantly higher than before. Superficial charm no longer sufficed. Financial transparency became expected. Emotional stability rated above excitement. Shared values outweighed physical attraction alone. These standards reflected lessons learned through hard experience rather than arbitrary cruelty. Society as a whole began adjusting to the new equilibrium. Real estate developers shifted toward smaller units and co living arrangements, anticipating prolonged singledom. Retailers targeted individual consumers rather than family units. Media narratives slowly incorporated stories of thriving single men alongside empowered single women, though the tone often remained polarized. Governments debated policies to encourage family formation, yet incentives struggled against deeply rooted behavioral changes. Economists modeled scenarios where lower birth rates reshaped labor markets, pension systems, and healthcare demands decades into the future. Demographers warned of aging populations with fewer young workers supporting larger elderly cohorts. These macro trends traced back to micro decisions multiplied across millions of individuals. For the men who walked away, the path felt liberating rather than tragic. They woke up each day without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down. Mornings started with coffee and silence rather than arguments or demands. Evenings ended with rest rather than emotional labor. Weekends filled with chosen activities rather than obligatory social obligations. Finances grew steadily because money stayed where it belonged with the earner. Health markers improved because stress reduction allowed better recovery. Purpose derived from mastery and contribution on personal terms rather than relational appeasement. The overall quality of life rose measurably for those who embraced the shift fully. Women navigating the same landscape discovered their own forms of strength even amid hardship. Careers that once served as backup plans became central pillars. Savings habits sharpened out of necessity. Boundaries strengthened. After experiences of being undervalued in other ways. Communities of like minded women formed to share resources, knowledge, and encouragement. Some chose to remain single by design, finding fulfillment in autonomy and achievement. Others adjusted expectations downward, seeking compatibility over status. A minority doubled down on traditional appeals, hoping to attract the remaining men willing to provide, but found the pool smaller and more discerning each year. The divide solidified into two parallel realities. One group thrived through detachment and self focus, the other adapted through necessity and reinvention. Neither returned to the old dynamic because the underlying conditions that produced it had changed permanently. Trust, once broken on such a wide scale, did not rebuild easily. Patterns, once recognized, did not unsee themselves. Peace, once tasted, did not relinquish its hold willingly. The era of assumed provision ended not with fanfare, but with quiet, consistent choices repeated daily by millions. This outcome carries weight far beyond individual lives. When large numbers of people opt out of traditional structures, entire systems feel the strain. Schools prepare fewer children. Hospitals serve aging populations with fewer taxpayers. Innovation shifts toward solving problems of solitude rather than family expansion. Cultural output reflects prolonged adolescence or mature independence, depending on perspective. Yet for the individuals directly involved, the change often feels like clarity after decades of confusion. Men reclaimed agency they had gradually surrendered. Women confronted realities they had partially outsourced. Both sides now operate without illusion. The story continues unfolding in real time, with each new generation observing the previous one and making its own calculations. Young men enter adulthood seeing clear examples of what entanglement can cost. Young women see the limits of independence when support networks thin. Both groups inherit a world where old scripts no longer apply automatically. Adaptation becomes the only constant. Those who recognize patterns early position themselves advantageously. Those who cling to outdated expectations face steeper adjustments. In the end, the shift traces back to a simple principle. People respond to incentives and disincentives. When costs rise and rewards diminish, behavior changes. When signals accumulate over decades, conclusions harden. When peace arrives after prolonged conflict, it guards itself jealously. Men found that peace in walking away, they intend to keep it. The consequences ripple outward in ways that touch every layer of daily existence and long term planning. Consider the housing market as one clear example of how these individual choices aggregate into structural pressure. When fewer people form traditional households, demand for large family sized homes softens in many urban and suburban areas, while smaller one bedroom or studio units see sustained interest from both men and women staying single longer. Builders respond by adjusting floor plans, developers pivot toward denser multifamily projects, and rental prices in certain segments stabilize or even decline relative to inflation because supply begins matching the new reality of prolonged singledom. Yet in other segments, particularly entry level family housing, prices remain stubbornly high because the remaining buyers who do form households face competition from institutional investors and cash rich foreigners, leaving aspiring young couples squeezed even further. This dynamic feeds back into the reluctance many feel toward marriage and children, since the biggest expense barrier keeps rising while dual income security feels less certain than it once did. Education patterns shift in tandem with these demographic changes. Universities notice enrollment imbalances that grow more pronounced each year, with women continuing to outpace men in degree completion across most fields, except certain STEM specialties where male participation holds steadier. Some campuses report declining male applications at the undergraduate level as young men question the return on investment for expensive credentials when many high earning paths now favor skills, certifications, trades, or entrepreneurship over traditional 4 year routes. Vocational programs, coding boot camps, trade schools, and apprenticeship pipelines see enrollment surges among men who prioritize income velocity and debt avoidance over prestige. Women, meanwhile, accumulate more student debt on average because they pursue longer educational timelines and fields that lead to stable but often lower paying public sector or helping profession roles. This debt disparity compounds the financial stress women face later when singlehood extends and no second income materializes to help service those loans. The gap widens further as men who opt for quicker entry into the workforce begin building equity through home ownership, investments, or business ownership years ahead of their degree holding counterparts still climbing out of negative net worth. Workplace culture absorbs these shifts quietly but noticeably. Men increasingly adopt boundary setting behaviors that once seemed radical. They decline after hours social events that feel obligatory or awkward. They limit mentorship relationships with junior female colleagues to strictly professional channels to avoid misinterpretation. They negotiate harder for remote work options that allow greater control over their environments and schedules. Productivity remains high because focus sharpens when distractions from relational navigation disappear. Companies notice higher retention among men who feel respected as individuals rather than as default providers or emotional buffers. At the same time, some organizations struggle with morale dips among women who perceive the atmosphere as colder or less collaborative than before. The old unspoken expectation that men would absorb tension, mediate conflicts, or provide informal emotional labor fades, forcing teams to develop new mechanisms for cohesion and support. Human resources departments update policies around interpersonal conduct with greater frequency, attempting to balance protection against overreach while still maintaining safe and inclusive environments. Yet, the net effect remains a workplace where men guard their energy more carefully and women shoulder more of the relational load themselves. Healthcare systems feel the strain from delayed family formation and lower birth rates in multiple directions. Fewer births mean fewer pediatric specialists needed in the future, but an accelerating demand for geriatric care, as populations age faster than replacement levels can offset. Chronic disease management becomes more individualized when patients lack live in partners who traditionally helped monitor medications, attend appointments, or provide transportation during recovery periods. Mental health services see increased demand from both genders, but for different reasons. Men who embrace solitude report lower rates of anxiety and depression tied to relational conflict, though some experience spikes in existential questions around legacy and purpose without children. Women report higher loneliness scores when social circles shrink after friends pair off and start families, compounded by financial stress that amplifies worry about long term security. Therapy modalities evolve to address these new presentations with greater emphasis on building internal validation, cultivating non romantic intimacy through friendships and community, and reframing independence as a source of strength rather than a consolation prize. Consumer spending patterns realign around the new demographics. Luxury brands that once targeted couples or families pivot toward experiences marketed to affluent singles. Travel companies launch solo friendly packages with group activities designed to reduce isolation without forcing romance. Fitness equipment manufacturers see sustained demand for home gym setups as men double down on physical self improvement in private spaces. Meal delivery services expand portion options for one, while premium pet products boom because companion animals fill emotional niches left vacant by absent partners or children. Streaming platforms notice longer average viewing sessions among single men who enjoy uninterrupted leisure time. Retailers stock more modular furniture suited to smaller living spaces and fewer nursery or wedding registry items. The economy gradually reorients towards serving individuals who control their own discretionary income rather than households pooling resources for shared goals. Cultural production mirrors these changes in both subtle and overt ways. Films and television series increasingly feature protagonists who thrive alone or in non traditional configurations rather than defaulting to romantic resolution as the happy ending. Male leads portrayed as content in bachelorhood gain sympathetic framing instead of being coded as tragic or immature. Female characters who remain single by choice receive more nuanced storylines that explore fulfillment beyond partnership, though some narratives still lean into regret or redemption arcs tied to finding the right man. Music shifts toward themes of self reliance, solitude as empowerment, and skepticism about traditional commitment. Social media influencers build large followings by documenting minimalist lifestyles, financial independence journeys, and intentional singledom. Content creators who speak directly to men about walking away from unfavorable dynamics amass dedicated audiences because they articulate what many feel but rarely voice publicly. Policy responses attempt to reverse or at least slow these trends, but face an uphill battle against deeply ingrained behavioral shifts. Cash payments for newborns, tax credits for married couples, subsidized childcare, and extended parental leave appear in various countries, yet fertility rates continue declining in most places where they have been implemented. Some governments experiment with cultural campaigns promoting family life or highlighting the joys of parenthood, but these efforts often encounter cynicism from younger cohorts who view them as out of touch attempts to push people back into roles that no longer feel viable or fair. Immigration policies loosen in some nations to offset population decline, though newcomers bring their own cultural expectations around gender roles that sometimes clash with host country norms, creating additional layers of tension. Through all of this, men who chose the path of detachment maintain a consistent stance. They do not celebrate the difficulties others face, nor do they wish hardship on anyone. They simply refuse to re enter a dynamic that repeatedly demonstrated imbalance and risk without corresponding reward. Their lives revolve around principles of self ownership, pattern recognition, and value alignment. They invest time in pursuits that compound positively over decades rather than obligations that drain without replenishment. They maintain health because vitality serves their own goals. They build wealth because security belongs to them first. They form friendships based on mutual respect rather than utility. They travel because curiosity drives them rather than escapism from home stress. They rest because peace is no longer negotiable. Women who adapt successfully discover reservoirs of capability they may not have fully tapped before. They negotiate raises more assertively when they know no secondary income will cushion shortfalls. They build emergency funds with discipline born of necessity. They cultivate friendships that withstand life changes rather than revolving around relationship status. They pursue passions sidelined during years focused on partner seeking. They mentor younger women with hard earned wisdom about financial literacy, boundary setting, and realistic expectations. Some even find that the absence of traditional pressure allows deeper self exploration and career acceleration than they experienced when relational goals competed for attention. The overall trajectory points toward a society organized around individual sovereignty rather than assumed interdependence. Connection remains possible and desirable for many, but only when it adds rather than subtracts from personal peace. Provision becomes a choice extended selectively rather than a default obligation. Respect flows both directions or not at all. Trust rebuilds slowly through demonstrated consistency rather than inherited roles. The old model fades not because one side won, but because both sides recalibrated based on lived experience. Younger generations watch these developments closely and adjust their own strategies accordingly. Boys raised in single mother households or witnessing parental separations learn early to prioritize self reliance and caution. Girls see mothers and older sisters navigating independence and learn to value financial autonomy from the start. Dating norms evolve toward greater transparency about intentions, finances, and long term goals because ambiguity carries higher cost in a low trust environment. Courtship lengthens as both parties vet more thoroughly. Cohabitation before marriage declines in some demographics because it blurs legal and financial boundaries without providing protection. Prenuptial agreements become normalized even among middle income couples as risk awareness spreads. This new equilibrium settles in gradually but firmly. No dramatic reversal appears on the horizon because the underlying incentives remain unchanged. Men continue guarding their peace because it proves superior to past alternatives. Women continue building independent foundations because no reliable rescue arrives. Society reorganizes itself around these facts, one decision at a time. The era of automatic provision ends quietly, replaced by an era of mutual accountability or chosen solitude. Both paths offer dignity when walked with intention. Both require courage to face reality without illusion. Both produce outcomes shaped by choices rather than entitlement. The men who walked away did not disappear from the world. They simply stepped out of one role and into full ownership of their lives. They work, create, rest, connect, and thrive on terms they define. Their absence from the old game changes the rules for everyone remaining. The field levels not through force, but through withdrawal. Power redistributes when participation stops. Agency returns to the individual when collective expectations lose their grip. The story reaches its clearest point here. Men found peace by leaving. They keep it by staying gone. The quiet revolution in male behavior reshapes not only personal lives, but also the subtle mechanics of how cities function on a day to day basis. Public transportation ridership patterns shift in noticeable ways during evening and weekend hours. Men who once rode trains or buses home from dates, from social gatherings, or from errands run for a partner now stay closer to home or choose different routes and times that align solely with their own schedules. Late night ridership among men in their 20s and 30s drops measurably in many metropolitan areas, while daytime commuting remains steady or even increases as more men channel freed up energy into side businesses or fitness routines that start earlier. Bars and restaurants that historically relied on date night traffic see softer midweek and weekend evenings. Tables once reserved for couples sit empty longer, prompting some establishments to pivot toward group events, trivia nights aimed at single professionals, or sports viewing packages that cater to male friend groups who now socialize in tighter, less mixed circles. Nightlife districts in major cities feel the change most acutely. Venues that thrived on the energy of men approaching women or buying rounds for mixed company report flatter revenue curves and begin experimenting with different atmospheres. Louder music to fill the silence, stronger focus on craft beer selections for discerning palates, or conversion into hybrid co working and drinking spaces during slower periods. Retail footprints adapt in parallel. Shopping malls that once counted on family outings and couple driven impulse purchases watch foot traffic skew toward solitary male shoppers who move quickly, buy purposefully, and leave. Electronics sections stay busy because men invest in personal upgrades, better headphones for uninterrupted focus, high end monitors for remote work setups, durable outdoor gear for solo adventures. Clothing stores notice men gravitating toward timeless, high quality basics rather than seasonal trends. The fast fashion cycle slows for this demographic as durability and versatility win out over variety. Jewelry counters and fragrance displays see reduced male traffic since gift giving occasions tied to romantic relationships decline sharply. Florists in urban neighborhoods report fewer walk in orders for spontaneous bouquets, while subscription services for houseplants and low maintenance greenery surge among men furnishing minimalist apartments. The entire consumer ecosystem begins tilting toward products and services that support independent, low drama living rather than shared domesticity. Automotive trends reflect the same underlying psychology. Pickup trucks and rugged SUVs maintain strong sales among men who value capability and solitude. Vehicles that can haul gear for personal projects, carry camping equipment for solo trips, or simply provide a private space larger than an apartment. As like sedans and compact crossovers marketed toward young families lose ground as that buyer segment shrinks. Electric vehicle adoption accelerates among men who prioritize efficiency, lower long term costs, and environmental alignment without needing to justify the purchase to anyone else. Dealerships adjust inventory accordingly, stocking more single occupant friendly configurations and fewer minivan equivalents. Insurance data begins showing interesting divergences. Single men in certain age brackets file fewer collision claims because they drive less aggressively when stress from relational dynamics no longer simmers beneath the surface, leading some carriers to quietly refine risk models for unmarried policyholders. Fitness and wellness industries experience one of the clearest boom periods tied to this shift. Gym chains open more 24-hour locations because men who reclaim their evenings now train at unconventional hours, late nights or early mornings when the facility stays quiet and distraction free. Personal training bookings rise among men in their 30s and 40s who treat physique as a lifelong project rather than a temporary bid for attention. Martial arts dojos, boxing gyms, and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu academies see sustained male enrollment as disciplines that build confidence, discipline, and practical capability without performative elements. Recovery modalities, saunas, cold plunges, massage therapy gain popularity because men treat physical maintenance as essential self care rather than an occasional luxury. Supplement sales climb steadily as research driven stacks replace bro science experimentation. Protein, creatine, vitamin D, omega 3S, and adaptogens move in volume because men view health optimization as direct investment in longevity and clarity. Outdoor recreation follows a similar arc. National park visitation by solo male travelers increases while group family camping holds flat or declines in percentage terms. Backpacking trails see more men carrying ultralight setups designed for self sufficiency over several days or weeks. Overland rigs become a visible subculture as men outfit vehicles for extended off grid travel that requires no itinerary shared with anyone else. Fishing, hunting, and shooting sports maintain steady participation because they offer solitude, skill progression, and tangible results without social overhead. kayaking, and paddleboarding rentals spike on weekdays when men take personal days or flex schedules to enjoy nature on their own clock. Technology adoption patterns pivot in ways that reinforce detachment. Dating apps lose dominance among men who once tolerated them as a necessary evil. Retention rates drop as uninstalls outpace new downloads in key demographics. Social media usage among men shifts toward consumption rather than active participation, scrolling feeds for information or entertainment, but rarely posting personal updates or engaging in comment wars. Privacy focused tools gain traction. Encrypted messengers replace casual texting threads, VPN subscriptions rise, and ad blockers become standard because men grow weary of algorithmic nudges toward consumerism or drama. Smart home setups expand rapidly among single men who automate lighting, climate, security, and routines to minimize effort and maximize control. Voice assistants handle reminders and playlists, while robotic vacuums and air purifiers maintain the environment without human intervention. Financial services notice the change in behavior at the portfolio level. Robo advisors and index fund platforms see higher average account sizes among younger male clients who started saving aggressively once disposable income stopped leaking into dates, gifts, and joint expenses. Cryptocurrency holdings skew male in demographic surveys because the asset class appeals to pattern recognizing minds comfortable with volatility and self custody. Real estate investment grows among men who view property as a wealth building tool rather than a marital asset. Single family rentals, small multifamily units, and short term vacation properties become popular vehicles for cash flow without the complexity of cohabitation. Retirement accounts compound faster when contributions rise and withdrawals stay minimal. Credit scores improve on average for men who eliminated lifestyle inflation tied to impressing or supporting a partner. Education and skill acquisition continue evolving outside traditional institutions. Online courses in finance, coding, copywriting, sales funnels, e commerce, and digital marketing attract men who treat learning as leverage rather than credentialing. Trade certifications in plumbing, electrical work, HVAC, welding, and heavy equipment operation draw younger men who calculate lifetime earnings potential against debt load and see clear advantages in skilled labor over white collar paths burdened by credential inflation. Language learning apps report sustained male usage as men prepare for potential relocation or simply enjoy the mental challenge of mastering a new system. Books on stoicism, minimalism, behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology, and personal sovereignty top sales charts in male skewing categories because they provide frameworks that validate lived experience and guide future decisions. Parenting dynamics shift in households that still form. When marriages or long term partnerships do occur, men enter them with far greater insistence on explicit agreements around finances, division of labor, and exit terms. Prenuptial agreements become routine conversation topics even among couples in their 20s. Shared bank accounts stay rare unless both parties contribute equally and transparently. Child rearing responsibilities distribute more evenly from the outset because men refuse to default into provider only roles, while mothers retain primary custody leverage in most jurisdictions. Some couples experiment with co parenting arrangements that keep separate residences even after children arrive, minimizing conflict and preserving individual autonomy. The overall number of intentional single fathers rises modestly as men who want children pursue surrogacy, adoption, or co parenting agreements that avoid romantic entanglement altogether. Religious and spiritual communities feel the ripple effects as well. Churches, mosques, temples, and other congregations notice declining male attendance in the 25 to 45 age range unless the institution actively addresses contemporary male concerns: fatherhood without family court risk, masculinity without apology, purpose beyond provision. Some faith groups launch men only study circles or service projects that emphasize brotherhood, competence, and self mastery. Secular equivalents emerge in the form of mastermind groups, accountability circles, and wilderness retreats designed specifically for men seeking structure and camaraderie without romantic subtext. Meditation and mindfulness practices gain deeper traction among men who use them to reinforce mental resilience rather than manage relational stress. Media consumption habits solidify the divide. Men gravitate toward long form podcasts and video essays that dissect incentives, human nature, economic trends, and historical patterns. True crime series lose some appeal when real world risk assessment already occupies mental bandwidth. Comedy specials that punch upward at institutional hypocrisy or downward at performative virtue resonate strongly. Documentary content exploring collapse dynamics, demographic winter, and civilizational cycles draws large audiences because it contextualizes personal observations within larger frameworks. Fiction reading tilts toward authors who portray competent, self directed protagonists navigating indifferent or hostile systems without requiring rescue. By the middle of the third decade of the 21st century, the pattern locks in so thoroughly that younger cohorts treat it as baseline reality rather than aberration. Boys reaching dating age inherit a cultural script that assumes caution, self prioritization, and skepticism toward traditional romantic narratives. Girls enter adulthood seeing fewer men willing to play provider and more emphasis placed on their own earning power and resource management from an early age. High school guidance counselors adjust college and career advice accordingly, stressing financial literacy, debt avoidance, and diversified life paths over singular focus on partnership. Peer groups form around shared philosophies of independence rather than couple oriented socializing. The cumulative weight of these adaptations produces a society that runs cooler, quieter, and more individually calibrated than the one that preceded it. Conflict decreases in volume because fewer people share living spaces long enough for resentments to compound. Consumption moderates as households shrink, and status signaling through partners fades. Innovation concentrates in areas that serve solitary efficiency: better automation, personalized medicine, remote work infrastructure, longevity research, while collective projects tied to family expansion receive less private capital. Loneliness metrics stabilize at higher levels than historical norms, but subjective well being among those who chose the path remains elevated because agency outweighs isolation for them. Men who completed the walkaway process decades earlier look back and see confirmation rather than regret. Their lives compound quietly. Net worth climbs, health markers improve, knowledge deepens, friendships endure because they rest on mutual utility rather than obligation. They mentor younger men informally through example rather than preaching. They travel farther and longer because schedules bend to no one else. They rest deeply because no unspoken debt hangs over their heads. They face old age with assets, skills, and clarity rather than dependence on systems or people who may not reciprocate. The arc reaches its logical endpoint not in triumph or tragedy, but in equilibrium. Provision ends as an assumed male role. Rescue ceases as a cultural expectation. Peace becomes non negotiable for those who earned it. Accountability settles on every individual, regardless of gender. The world keeps turning, quieter in some rooms, louder in others, but undeniably different because half the players change the game by leaving the field. The transformation settles into something permanent and structural, altering not just how people pair or fail to pair, but how entire generations calibrate their ambitions, timelines, and definitions of a worthwhile life. Young men now reaching their mid 20s enter the adult world already steeped in the lessons their older brothers and cousins absorbed the hard way. They watch fathers, uncles, and family friends navigate post divorce realities, reduced bank accounts, restricted access to children they helped raise, court mandated payments stretching into retirement age, and decide early that the conventional script carries unacceptable downside. High school conversations among boys increasingly revolve around side hustles, crypto wallets, fitness protocols, and overseas relocation plans, rather than which girl they plan to ask to prom. College campuses see male enrollment continue its downward slide in liberal arts programs, while engineering, computer science, data analytics, and applied trades hold steady or grow modestly. The young men who do attend university treat it as a calculated investment rather than a rite of passage. Many work full time jobs simultaneously, live frugally in shared housing off campus, and graduate with minimal debt or none at all because they view borrowing as a trap that limits future maneuverability. Girls of the same age cohort grow up observing a different but equally instructive picture. They see mothers and aunts who once expected a certain level of male provision, now managing solo households, juggling careers and childcare, and openly discussing the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. Social media feeds flood with content from women in their 30s and 40s, warning younger followers not to count on a man showing up to fix financial problems, pay off student loans, or subsidize lifestyle creep. The messaging shifts from earlier decades of girl power optimism toward pragmatic realism. Build your own money, protect your credit, learn to negotiate salaries, stack skills that cannot be easily outsourced or automated. Teenage girls join group chats where friends share budgeting templates, investment apps, side gig ideas, and warnings about men who present as providers but disappear when real bills arrive. Prom and homecoming still happen, but the pressure to couple up feels less existential. Many opt for large friend group outings instead of one on one dates because the perceived return on emotional investment has visibly declined. Dating itself undergoes a quiet but thorough redesign among people under 30. First messages on apps become shorter, more direct, and frequently include baseline filters: current employment status, living situation, debt level, long term location plans. Women who once could rely on ambiguity to keep options open now face men who simply unmatch or ghost when answers feel evasive. Men list explicit deal breakers in bios: no children from previous relationships unless custody is shared equally, no expectation of paid dates beyond the first meet, no tolerance for ongoing financial support requests, and stick to those boundaries without apology. Speed dating events and singles mixers in major cities experiment with formats that force financial transparency early. Some require proof of income or net worth screenshots before entry, while others use anonymous questionnaires to match on core compatibility metrics before names or photos are exchanged. The old dance of gradual revelation gives way to upfront negotiation because both sides recognize that delayed discovery usually ends in resentment. Cohabitation before marriage, once a near universal stepping stone, becomes statistically rarer in many Western countries. Young couples who do move in together often maintain separate bank accounts, split rent and utilities down to the cent, and draft informal cohabitation agreements covering furniture ownership, pet custody, and exit terms. The legal and financial entanglement that used to feel romantic or practical now registers as unnecessary risk to both parties. When breakups occur, The process proves cleaner and less acrimonious because assets never fully commingled. Marriage, when it happens at all, tends to occur later, often in the late 30s or early 40s, and among couples who have already achieved individual financial stability. Wedding guest lists shrink, ceremonies simplify, and receptions focus on close family and long term friends rather than performative displays. Prenuptial agreements, once viewed as unromantic, become standard boilerplate. Couples treat them as routine estate planning rather than signals of distrust. Fertility decisions reflect the same sharpened cost benefit analysis. Women who want children increasingly pursue single motherhood by choice through sperm donation, IVF, or adoption because waiting for a committed male partner feels statistically unreliable. Men who desire fatherhood sometimes opt for surrogacy arrangements in jurisdictions that allow it or enter co parenting contracts with women who share the same goal but no romantic interest. The traditional nuclear family model persists among a shrinking minority, while blended, intentional, and single parent configurations gain cultural visibility and logistical support. Daycare waitlists lengthen in urban centers as more infants arrive via non traditional routes. Pediatric practices adapt by offering extended evening hours and telehealth options tailored to working single parents of both genders. Corporate human resources departments rewrite policies to reflect the new demographics. Paternity leave uptake among men rises modestly but remains lower than maternity leave usage because fewer men become fathers within committed partnerships. Companies that once offered spousal relocation packages or family health plan subsidies quietly scale back those benefits or make them opt in because the number of employees with traditional dependents declines. Employee assistance programs expand counseling for prolonged singledom, financial stress, and legacy anxiety. Diversity initiatives begin including content around neurodiversity, introversion, and chosen solitude as legitimate lifestyle orientations rather than conditions to be fixed. Performance reviews place greater weight on individual output and less on team social cohesion because remote and hybrid work normalizes asynchronous contribution over constant interpersonal availability. Real estate markets in growing suburbs and ex-urban areas soften noticeably for larger four-bedroom homes, while demand holds firm for townhouses, condominiums, and accessory dwelling units that suit one or two occupants. Home builders introduce more lock and leave designs, low maintenance exteriors, smart home integration, small private yards, or rooftop terraces because buyers prioritize ease of upkeep over space for children who may never arrive. Rental platforms see longer average lease terms among men in their 30s who prefer stability and predictable costs over frequent moves tied to relationship changes. Storage unit businesses thrive as people downsize possessions to match smaller living footprints without sacrificing treasured items. The travel industry reorients around solo and small group male travelers who book longer trips with greater frequency. Adventure tour operators report higher male participation in multi week treks, motorcycle journeys across continents, sailing expeditions, and overland drives through remote regions. Luxury solo travel packages gain traction among men who have accumulated wealth through disciplined saving and now spend it on experiences that require no compromise. Private fishing charters in Patagonia, guided Himalayan treks, extended stays in quiet coastal villages in Portugal or Thailand. Cruise lines add more single occupancy cabins at reasonable supplements because demand rises steadily. Digital nomad visas in countries like Portugal, Estonia, Malaysia, and Costa Rica attract a steady stream of Western men who work remotely live minimally, and enjoy climates and cultures that feel less hostile to masculine presence. Culinary habits evolve in tandem with the lifestyle. Meal prep services see strong growth among men who cook in bulk once a week, freeze portions, and eat the same nutrient dense meals repeatedly for efficiency. High end steakhouses and whiskey bars maintain loyal male clientele who enjoy occasional indulgence without needing to justify the expense to anyone. Fast casual chains offering customizable protein heavy bowls and salads report sustained weekday lunch traffic from men who treat food as fuel rather than social performance. Home brewing and craft distilling hobbies flourish in garages and basements because they combine creativity, technical mastery, and tangible results with zero relational overhead. Creative output from this demographic tilts toward work that explores themes of autonomy, pattern recognition, systems thinking, and quiet defiance. Independent publishing platforms host growing libraries of nonfiction titles examining incentive structures in modern relationships, evolutionary pressures on mating behavior, economic disincentives to marriage, and philosophical defenses of voluntary solitude. Documentary filmmakers produce low budget but high impact pieces on demographic decline, male withdrawal, female financial precarity, and the quiet prosperity of intentional minimalism. Podcasters host long form conversations with guests who have lived both sides of the divide, men who walked away and never looked back, women who rebuilt after expecting provision that never materialized. Music in underground genres leans into lyrics about self ownership, skepticism toward institutions, and the relief of unburdened days. By the late 2020s and into the early 2030s, the pattern becomes so normalized that mainstream commentary stops treating it as a crisis requiring urgent reversal and begins analyzing it as a stable adaptation to changed material and cultural conditions. Economists publish papers modeling the long tail effects, smaller average household size driving lower per capita consumption of certain goods, higher savings rates among men boosting capital formation, delayed childbearing shifting peak healthcare demand further into the future, slower labor force growth constraining GDP expansion unless offset by automation or immigration. Sociologists document the rise of chosen singlehood as a legitimate status rather than a transitional phase. Psychologists note that reported life satisfaction among never married men in their 40s now frequently exceeds that of their married peers when controlling for income and health status. Women who navigated the transition successfully often emerge with a different but equally hardened form of clarity. Many achieve higher career trajectories than previous generations because no relational obligations diluted focus. Some build substantial wealth through entrepreneurship, real estate investing, or high earning professions once considered male dominated. Others find deep satisfaction in chosen communities, women only co living arrangements, professional networks, hobby based circles that provide emotional support without financial entanglement. A subset deliberately re enters the dating market with radically revised expectations, seeking men who match their own level of independence rather than hoping to secure provision. The men who set the shift in motion decades earlier reach their 50s and 60s in positions of unusual security. Pensions and investment accounts grow undisturbed by divorce settlements or child support obligations. Health remains robust because decades of consistent training and low chronic stress compound favorably. Social lives stay small but rich with friendships forged through shared interests rather than couple oriented socializing. Many mentor younger men informally, offering perspective rather than prescription. They travel extensively in retirement because passports and bank accounts remain fully under their control. They face mortality with equanimity because legacy is measured in personal integrity and quiet impact rather than biological descendants or public acclaim. Society as a whole reaches a new homeostasis. Birth rates stabilize at low but non catastrophic levels. Economies adapt to slower population growth through greater reliance on technology and selective immigration. Cultural narratives diversify to reflect a broader spectrum of acceptable life paths. Connection persists, friendships, mentorships, casual alliances, but romantic pairing becomes one option among many rather than the presumed default. Provision ceases to be a gendered expectation and settles into a transactional negotiation when it occurs at all. Peace, once a rare commodity for many men, becomes the baseline they refuse to surrender. The story does not end in utopia or a collapse. It ends in a world that learned to function with fewer illusions, fewer automatic roles, and far greater individual sovereignty. Men walked away because staying cost more than it returned. They stayed away because the return on solitude proved higher than any promise of partnership ever delivered. The roads diverged long ago. Most men took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference. The long term settling of this new equilibrium brings into sharp focus how institutions once built around the assumption of widespread family formation now operate in a landscape where that assumption no longer holds. Pension systems in many developed nations, designed during eras of steady population replacement and consistent workforce growth, begin showing structural stress fractures that grow more visible with each passing decade. Actuaries recalibrate projections repeatedly, extending retirement ages, adjusting benefit formulas, and increasing contribution requirements because the ratio of active workers to retirees tilts steadily toward the latter. Governments respond with incremental reforms, higher payroll taxes on remaining earners, means testing for certain entitlements, encouragement of private supplemental savings vehicles. Yet the math remains unforgiving when birth cohorts shrink generation after generation. Men who opted out of parenthood decades earlier reach retirement with personal nest eggs that often exceed those of their peers who raised children, because child rearing expenses that once consumed 20 to 30% of household income never materialized for them. These men draw modest public benefits supplemented by substantial private accumulations, allowing comfortable, if understated, retirements while the system strains under heavier reliance on a smaller pool of contributors. Healthcare delivery systems undergo parallel adaptation. Geriatric wards expand capacity, while pediatric units consolidate or repurpose beds in regions where child populations plateau or decline. Home health services grow rapidly to serve aging singles who lack live in family support, with robotic assistance, remote monitoring wearables, and on demand nursing visits becoming standard rather than luxury add ons. Preventive medicine programs target lifestyle diseases more aggressively among middle aged and older men who now constitute a larger share of the patient pool. Annual checkups include detailed metabolic panels, DEXA scans for bone density, VO2 max testing, and biomarker tracking because these men treat longevity as a personal project rather than something to be left to chance or family legacy. Pharmaceutical pipelines shift investment toward therapies addressing age related decline. Senolytics, NAD boosters, rapamycin analogs, GLP-1 agonist repurposed for metabolic health because consumer demand from self-funding patients creates market signals stronger than government reimbursement schedules alone. Mental health infrastructure expands teletherapy and group programs tailored to late life solitude, existential purpose seeking, and grief over paths not taken, though Dropout rates remain low among men who already internalized acceptance of their choices years earlier. Urban planning departments rewrite master plans to accommodate smaller average household sizes and different mobility patterns. Transit authorities reduce frequency on routes historically serving family suburbs while increasing service on corridors connecting downtown cores to lifestyle enclaves popular among single professionals. Arts districts, university adjacent neighborhoods, walkable mixed use zones with abundant green space. Bike share and e scooter networks expand because solo commuters favor lightweight, flexible transport over family sized vehicles. Public parks add more adult oriented amenities, adult sized playground equipment for calisthenics, dedicated disc golf courses, quiet reading gardens, off leash dog areas with agility setups, because usage skews toward individuals and small male friend groups rather than large family picnics. Zoning boards relax restrictions on accessory dwelling units, granny flats, and micro apartments to increase housing stock suited to one or two-person households without requiring massive greenfield development. The commercial real estate sector feels the change acutely. Suburban office parks built during the dual income boom see higher vacancy rates as remote work solidifies and fewer households need proximity to corporate campuses for two commute logistics. Retail corridors, once anchored by big box stores catering to family shopping lists, pivot toward experiential tenants, specialty coffee roasters, artisanal barber shops, indoor climbing gyms, board game cafes, vinyl record lounges that draw discretionary spending from men who control their own budgets. Strip malls repurpose empty big box footprints into fulfillment centers for e commerce, self storage expansions, or mixed use conversions featuring co working spaces above ground floor boutique fitness studios. Downtown cores in secondary cities experience modest renaissance as remote workers relocate for lower cost and higher quality of life, bringing with them spending power previously concentrated in coastal metros. Energy consumption patterns shift in response to smaller living units and different daily rhythms. Per capita residential electricity and natural gas demand moderates because one or two-person households heat, cool, and light less square footage than traditional four-person families. Peak load profiles flatten slightly as fewer homes run simultaneous high draw appliances for large evening meals or multiple children's bath and bed routines. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure grows faster in urban multifamily buildings and workplace garages than in single family suburban driveways because men living alone more often adopt battery electric or plug in hybrid vehicles for personal commuting and weekend escapes. Renewable energy adoption accelerates among this demographic because solar plus storage setups offer independence from utility price volatility and grid outages, aligning with the broader preference for self reliance. Agricultural supply chains adjust upstream as dietary preferences and household sizes change. Meat producers see sustained demand for premium cuts, grass fed beef, pasture raised pork, wild caught fish, because men cooking for themselves prioritize protein density and flavor over bulk volume. Vegetable and fruit growers report steady interest in smaller, higher quality packs rather than family sized bags. Meal kit companies offering single serve or two serve portions expand market share, while traditional family oriented frozen dinner brands consolidate or rebrand. Craft beer and small batch spirits continue their long growth run because men treat occasional drinking as a curated ritual rather than a social lubricant for mixed gatherings. The education sector beyond university level sees parallel realignment. Community colleges and technical institutes experience enrollment stability or modest growth in programs leading to immediate employability. Welding, diesel mechanics, commercial drone piloting, cybersecurity fundamentals, industrial automation, because young men view these paths as low risk routes to six-figure earning potential without the cultural and financial overhead of traditional college. Online micro credential platforms thrive as men stack certifications in cloud architecture, blockchain development, quantitative trading, copywriting funnels, and search engine optimization to build diversified income streams that do not depend on any single employer or industry. Corporate training departments shift budgets toward individual upskilling accounts rather than cohort based leadership programs because fewer mid career men aspire to management tracks that require constant interpersonal navigation. Military recruitment and retention patterns reflect the same underlying psychology. Enlistment rates among young men stabilize or rise modestly in branches that emphasize skill acquisition, camaraderie, physical challenge, and clear mission structure because these elements resonate with a generation already prioritizing competence and brotherhood over domestic stability. Reenlistment bonuses increase for technical specialties, cyber warfare, unmanned systems, special operations support, because men who serve view the military as a high intensity environment that delivers purpose and financial security without the long term liabilities of civilian marriage markets. Veterans Services adapt by expanding outreach around transition challenges specific to single men, housing instability without family fallback, mental health support tailored to combat related isolation rather than family readjustment, financial literacy programs emphasizing wealth preservation over household budgeting. International relations dynamics feel subtle but real downstream effects. Countries with persistently low fertility and aging populations accelerate immigration policies targeting skilled workers while simultaneously negotiating bilateral agreements that encourage return migration or circular flows. Nations with younger demographics and more traditional gender norms, certain Southeast Asian, Latin American, and Eastern European countries become magnets for Western men seeking long term residency or second passports, bringing capital, expertise, and consumer spending that bolsters local economies. Remittance flows reverse in some corridors as Western men support aging parents back home or invest in property abroad without the complicating factor of supporting a local family unit. Diplomatic conversations around brain drain or demographic competition include frank acknowledgement that lifestyle preferences now drive migration as much as economic opportunity. By the mid 2030s, the pattern solidifies into historical fact rather than contemporary controversy. Textbooks in sociology and demography courses include chapters titled The Great Male Withdrawal or Voluntary Disentanglement that treat the phenomenon as a rational collective response to misaligned incentives rather than a moral failing on either side. Historians draw parallels to earlier periods of monasticism, frontier individualism, or post war bachelor subcultures, noting that each represented men opting for paths of lower entanglement when prevailing conditions made traditional roles feel punitive or pointless. Economists publish longitudinal studies showing that men who never married or cohabited accumulated 30 to 60% higher net worth by age 65 than their matched peers who did, even after controlling for education and initial earnings because lifetime consumption remained lower and savings rates stayed consistently higher. Women who reach the same life stage through different routes often arrive at parallel security through different means. Those who remained single or divorced early built careers that compounded into executive roles, successful businesses, or professional practices. Their retirement accounts reflect decades of uninterrupted contributions plus aggressive investment strategies honed by necessity. Many own property outright or hold significant equity because no marital division diluted assets. They maintain robust social networks built on shared history and mutual support rather than couple based socializing. Some adopt companion animals or foster long term mentorship relationships with younger women as ways of creating legacy without biological children. Their health trajectories mirror those of their male counterparts in many respects. Consistent exercise, disciplined nutrition, proactive medical screening, because both groups treat longevity as a personal responsibility rather than something entrusted to family caretakers. The cultural atmosphere grows noticeably less frantic. Public discourse around relationships loses much of its earlier heat because the question of who should provide for whom ceases to be a live controversy when provision is no longer widely expected from men. Media coverage shifts from alarmist headlines about the end of marriage to measured analyses of how societies adapt when pairing becomes optional. Advice columns pivot toward questions of self mastery, boundary enforcement, financial independence, and meaningful solitude, rather than how to attract or keep a partner. Self help literature emphasizes internal locus of control, pattern based decision making, and the cultivation of anti fragility over romantic strategies or gender war rhetoric. In the end, the shift proves neither catastrophe nor salvation. It simply becomes the new normal, a world in which adults enter maturity expecting to carry their own weight, define their own purpose, and protect their own peace. Men who walked away early preserved what mattered most to them. Women who adapted built strength they might never have discovered otherwise. Institutions bent without breaking. Economies slowed in some dimensions and accelerated in others. The human story continued, quieter in places, more deliberate everywhere, shaped by choices made when the old incentives finally stopped working. To the 1 hour gang who made it all the way through this deep dive, respect for staying locked in until the end. If you have been enjoying these angry guy breakdowns and the raw clarity we bring to what is really happening out there, you can show direct support by buying me a Red Bull using the link in the description. It keeps the engine running for the next one. Drop a comment below and let me know what hit hardest in all this. Do you see the same patterns playing out around you? Do you agree that the old deal is permanently off the table? Share your thoughts straight up. Like the video if you like it. Do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MUA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.